Hello and welcome to my bathroom. I don't know how the audio is going to be in here right now. There's a bunch of crickets right outside, but the light in here is really pretty, so I think we're going to do it in here. So it's below 80 degrees, which means I'm thinking about Robert Eggers' The Witch, and I really wanted to do a rendition of Thomasin's costume from this movie. So I usually work in a later period. I usually do, a little bit of 18th century, 19th century, early 20th century. And I've never made anything from the 17th century. And this movie takes place in 1630, I think. So Thomasin's costume is pretty straightforward. It's a bodice that laces up with a skirt attached to it, and then a waistcoat, a cap, and a straw hat, and cute little pilgrim-ass shoes. I think the reason this movie is so fun and interesting for me is that I also live in New England, and there's a very particular flavor of bleak, unknown wilderness that happens here that I really love. I think this movie also taps into this really scary religious history, like specifically Christian religious history of like settlers occupying this land. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The original costume, I believe, is made out of hemp and linen and wool. And her dress and waistcoat are this like beautiful, sad pink mauve, I think boiled wool. I found these cool illustrations from the costume designer that I used as reference when I was working on this. And wool is fairly expensive now. So I decided to use this like destroyed quilt that I had on my bed because it's here and it's a similar sort of, it ended up being a little bit bulky, but I think this is the right sort of idea for this material. Behold some of this taxidermy that I did myself. That's the first squirrel I ever skinned. And this is a squirrel bag that my ex-partner Andrew made for me. I don't think I have the stomach to do that stuff anymore. So I have this shredded quilt that I thought was like the right material, but I was really worried about it surviving the dye process because it's so on its last thread that I was like, I might spend a while sewing this thing and then it might just disintegrate in the washing machine when I wash the dye out, but it ended up being okay. I think that the materials that people in the 1630s had access to, so they, I guess, came from England in the story, in this movie. So the dyes that they probably had access to in this time period were stuff like madder, woad, couch, maybe cochineal, which I think was still like coming from South America at this point. And her outfit is this like beautiful muted pink, and I have this extensive dyebrary. Hi, Riri. Do you think I have enough brown dye? That I figured I would just make it out of, I would change the color with RIT dye because that's what I have access to, and also I think it's really easy for me to control. I did do like 10 samples to make sure that I was gonna get the color right. It's always kind of a stressful thing to sew something for like 8 to 10 to 12 hours and then be like, okay, let's just like throw it all in a vat and see what happens, and it might get fucked. This is the part that makes me feel like, haha, I'm in danger. And in the past, if I dye something and really hate the color, I strip it and dye it again, but I knew this fabric wasn't gonna survive something like that. So it ended up being okay. I just needed to do a bunch of samples to figure it out. And then the last part of this project, for the reveal, Spain and I, my partner, figured out that we live 10 minutes from a house that was built in 1690, which is like a little bit later than this time period, but still kind of an incredible property that I can link down below if you want to go visit it. They do house tours on Sundays. It's like in the middle of this super residential area, which is kind of wild. We were just like driving through all these houses that were like built in the 1950s, built in the 1910s, and then suddenly it's like this old like 1690s house, like just in the center of this residential neighborhood. So we waited for a day for it to be pouring and overcast, and we stood out there in the rain and shot it for an extended period of time. And bless Spain for doing this with me, because we got in the car and like our shoes were squishy and our underwear was squishy. It was just like a really wet day of shooting. And the final piece of this project was, there's a song that plays, it's an English traditional that plays at the end of the movie in the credits. Mark Corbin did the soundtrack for this, and it's credited in the soundtrack as Isle of Wight, but I've never heard it called that song before. In every search I've done, it's called Alas and Did My Savior Bleed, and it was actually written in like 1710 or 1708 or something. So I did a rendition of that as well, because I thought that having that musical component that taps into that scary, religious, like uber pious history is just like the perfect icing on the creepy cake of being afraid of the unknown, being afraid of the afterlife, being afraid of these things that like we have conceived of ourselves, witches, powerful women, things that society has historically like been obsessed with and terrified by. So that's the project, and here it is. I'm sitting at my sewing desk. I have a kind of fuck it we ball approach to sewing, and I had somebody recently ask me why I don't pin my work every single time I do a seam, and the real answer is because I'm doing little like micro adjustments every quarter inch with my finger, and it works. It's fine. Okay, here is where we're at. There's a little too much overlap in the front for where the buttons are gonna go, but I think the fit is pretty good. Whoop. I think it's pretty close. So now I'm just gonna change the front of it a little bit, figure out like where my button placket is gonna go, and then I'm gonna do some top stitching. This is a shirt that I've had since I was in high school. Wrong era of undergarments, but I don't have stays that feel like comfortable for me right now or fit nicely, so I feel like this is gonna give me like a nice flat front, which is what I'm looking for. So I'm gonna go with these totally wrong era undergarments. Alas, and did my Savior bleed? And did my sovereign die? Would he devote that sacred head for sinners such as I? Was it for crimes that